Hello and welcome to the Practical Animal channel, dedicated to helping people who want to work with animals. Perhaps you want to work with wild animals or domestic ones. If with domestic animals, it could be with companion animals, dogs and cats, or with agricultural livestock, farm animals. Or perhaps you want to work with wildlife. That could be with wild animals in the wild, such as by being a professional naturalist, by which I mean a field biologist. Or perhaps you want to be a zookeeper, working with wild species as part of a collection. Whatever your preference, we aim to cover it all. Every week I interview an animal industry professional, asking him or her what are the skills and personal qualities needed to work with the animal that they've built their career with. My next guest is Mark O'Shea. This is the third in a series of videos featuring Mark, who is a professor of herpetology at the University of Wolverhampton in the UK. Mark has worked with reptiles all of his life, and he's been involved as a television naturalist, presenting about snakes in the wild. He's also been involved in the zoo world as a curator of a collection. What he had to say in the interview was so interesting that, like I said, I've divided up into several videos. In today's video, Mark talks about his influences, which include Sir David Attenborough and the author David Quammen and his mentor David Worrell. He talks about undertaking a research trip and following in the footsteps of David Quammen, the author, who was describing the life and work of Alfred Russel Wallace. Mark also talks about a relatively easy way to get your name down as an author in a scientific paper. So that comes towards the end of the interview, so stay tuned. Hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Thank you very much. Mark, who or which book or what meeting has most influenced your thinking?
My mentor would probably be Professor David Worrell. He's Professor Emeritus at Oxford University now, and we've been friends and we've worked together on projects for a long time. He's one of the world's top snakebite, malaria, rabies, tropical medicine experts. He's supposed to be in retirement now, but he's busier than ever. A tremendous man. He saved my life several times when I've had bites. There's nobody I'd rather be in contact with then, but he's a very good judge of character. He's a very good academic. He doesn't feel that he's got to fill space with words. So if you're talking to him, sometimes there'll be a silence, and that's while he's thinking about what he's going to say in return. And that's a sign of somebody who's confident. And he's just generally a really nice person. And he's inspired me a great deal. Obviously, another David would be Sir David Attenborough, who I have been fortunate enough to meet. I advised when they were doing Life in Cold Blood, his production team, and they all came up to spend some time with me at the safari park, so I could talk to them about how to act around dangerous snakes and things like that. He's tremendous. I mean, as somebody who's been a TV presenter, he is absolutely the best natural history presenter there has ever been, and I can't see him ever being surpassed. And again, a very knowledgeable man who's inspired me to look at other aspects of biology, like paleontology and things like that, because he's also an excellent archaeologist and historian, of course. And it's gone third David Quammen, my favorite author, author of Song of the Dodo, which is a book about island biogeography. Now, when I was working in Papua New Guinea for Oxford Uni and Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine in the early 90s, I was based on a research station in the northeast of the country, and they'd got a pretty good library. And I found these books on island biogeography, and I read them to cover, and I just fell in love with the subject. Why species are on islands, what factors affect that, what species are there. And the father of island biogeography, of course, was Alfred Russel Wallace, who is most famous for nudging Darwin's elbow and causing Darwin to publish The Origin of the Species. But Wallace was traveling from Bali to Lombok in Indonesia, and it's only 23 kilometers, small strait, but it's deep water. And he noticed that he stopped seeing the oriental species he was used to seeing. He'd come down from Borneo and Java to Bali, the birds, the butterflies and things like that he was used to seeing. And he started to see what species he attributed with Australasia. And he realized that this narrow stretch of water was really important. Well, that is now where the Wallace line goes through, that divides the oriental from the Australasian region. And there's another line a bit nearer to New Guinea and Australia called the Lydekker line. And in between the Wallace line and the Lydekker line is Wallacea. And it's this transition zone between two zoogeographical zones. Now, the thing I liked about David Quammen's Song of the Dodo is he didn't just sit at his computer, read books and regurgitate. He went out and he visited the places where workers were carrying on work. He went to Madagascar to see work on Tenrex. He went to Komodo. He went to all the places that he wrote about. And he was traveling down from the Greater Sunda Islands into the Lesser Sunda Islands, from Java to Bali to Lombok. And he's crossing there. And I'm reading him following Alfred Russel Wallace as I'm going the other way. Because I was reading Song of the Dodo for the second time when I was filming. We'd finished filming on the Komodo Islands. We'd got to make another film on Krakatoa, which erupted in 1883, the loudest sound ever heard by man. We were going to go there, and we were supposed to have a flight pick us up on Sumbawa, an island in the Lesser Sundas, and the aircraft went over with only one wheel down. They couldn't get the other one down. I don't know what they did, whether they flew until they ran out of fuel or what, but clearly we weren't going to get our ride. So we hired a bus, myself and the film crew and everything. And we traveled by bus up all the way up the archipelago. And we went over in the middle of the night on a ferry from Lombok to Bali. So I'm reading Quammen as I'm going the other way, which was quite a nice touch. And I got so into the way he wrote that he didn't expect you to have a degree to understand what he was saying. He wrote in a way that you wanted to keep reading. It was hard to put down the book, a fascinating book, and I've recommended it to lots of people. And he's written other books. He wrote Monster of God about man-eating predators, which was truly a fascinating book. He looked at European brown bear in Romania. He looked at the Amur leopard in Far Eastern Russia. He looked at I think was saltwater crocodiles in Northern Australia, and he looked at the Indian lion in the Gir forest in Gujarat state in India. And he went to all these places and met the people, talked to them. He wrote a book called Spillover, which was about pandemics. And it came out just when the Ebola crisis was going through West Africa, if you remember, not the last one, the one before that, the really big one. And they reissued the chapter on Ebola at the same time because people wanted to read it. And that was called, I think, The Chimp and the River. But the whole book was called Spillover. And in the book, he talks about, he traced an awful lot of human diseases, viral diseases, back to their origins and how people had contracted them. And an awful lot were from wet markets and bats and primates. And he says in the book, scientific epidemiologists and virologists are agreed there is going to be another pandemic, a worldwide pandemic. They just don't know when. And a few short years later, we're in one. And I was reading Spillover again during the pandemic. And that statement, written only a few years earlier, sent a chill down my back because they said it was coming. He said it's coming. We don't know when. Well, it's here. And that was spooky. And he wrote a book about horizontal gene transfer called the Tangled Tree, which, if you're going to read Quammen, don't start with the Tangled Tree. That is one you possibly do need a degree in genetics to understand. But the rest of them, the boilerplate rhino, flight of the iguana, tremendous. That's how I'm influenced by David Worrell, David Attenborough, and David Quammen.
The three David.
Yeah, probably others as well, but those three in particular.
Mark, this next question is kind of two questions. I normally would leave this question till later on, but it's just become so relevant at this stage in the interview. Please, can you give us a sense of what you think, your view of herpetology in your broadest sense as a career today? So that could be working in a collection as a zookeeper, or as an academic carrying out field biology. And also, to work with snakes, is it necessary to have a degree?
Okay, well, there's a lot of different aspects to herpetology, really. Some people make their careers out of breeding species for the pet trade or for specialists, and a lot of people are very interested. A lot of very good captive care is done by the private community. So obviously but they generally, there's an American term that's usually applied to people who keep and breed reptiles, and that's a fairly recent term, and it's herpetoculturalist, because you wouldn't refer to somebody who kept tropical fish, no matter how exotic, as an ichthyologist. That's somebody who studies fish. You'd call them an aquarist or aquaculturalist if they were breeding and things like that. But there are aspects of herpetology, obviously, that the private community that simply wants to do this as a hobby can actually do, and that is things like keeping and breeding snakes in captivity, reptiles and amphibians in captivity, provided they're keeping the right species for the right reasons. I don't have a problem with that at all. It also means that if there's a lot of captive animals available, there's less desire for stuff to be taken out of the wild. Also, people who are keen amateurs can get involved with their local wildlife trusts, their reptile and amphibian groups, and get involved in doing surveys under the guidance of the local officers, the local wildlife officers. And that can be very therapeutic, giving your time to go out and work on a project. You come back wet and cold, but inspired, because what you've done is helping great crested newts or something like that. So there's aspects that you don't really need to follow any sort of career to do. Working in a zoo, and bear in mind that I've been in the zoo world, I've been in the television world, and I'm in the academic world at the moment. and I've been in the private keeping world, although I don't keep anything myself anymore. So I've experienced all these different facets. What was I going to say then? Working in a zoo, you don't need a degree to care for animals in a zoological collection any more than you do if you've got a private collection. But if you're applying for a job in a zoo, they will look to see what qualifications you've got, because they're going to need filters to work out who the best fit for their staff is. And seeing as the fact that zoos are no longer just menageries that compete with each other to have something nobody else has got, those days are long gone. They are, by and large, scientific collections that are engaged in a lot of conservation work of their own. They are educational institutions that are promoting conservation. And so the best fit person to go into a collection like that would be somebody with qualifications. So obviously getting a degree is a positive step towards a job in a collection like that, well, regardless of which group of animals you want to work on. But you can get a degree late in life. I proved that when I went to a mature student, and some people do them part-time and things like that. And then if you're going into academia, yes, you can do that part-time. You can do an MSc or PhD part-time if you need to keep a job. Definitely, a degree isn't just something that says this person has achieved a certain degree of has a certain degree of intelligence and achieved a certain qualification. Doing a degree teaches you some of the other skills I mentioned earlier about learning to write in a way that's engaging, and being able to hold an audience and talk to people and educate them, and learn all the little tricks you need, like some statistics and things like that. So a degree, it teaches you also, when you're at school, you're basically told what to do. But when you start on a degree, you're told to think outside of the box. You don't have your hand held as much. And it is very much to you to get on with it. And if you don't get on with it, then you don't pass. And so probably that's why I appreciated it much more coming back into education, having been out in the big wide world working in accident emergency for a number of years, because I knew that if I needed to get on with something, I didn't need somebody to have to tell me to get on with it. Whereas maybe some youngsters coming from school, suddenly they're off the leash and the parties are more attractive in the evenings, and suddenly they're way behind with their work. And so, yeah, you have time management's a very important skill that you learn while you're doing your degree. What else? I mean, there's quite a lot of work with reptiles on different in different spheres, but of course we are a country in Britain. We only have a certain number of species, and obviously there's more work overseas on other snake faunas, lizard faunas, frog faunas, and so forth. But if you've got a degree, that does equip you to actually apply for those posts overseas, which if you hadn't got a qualification, you'd have a job getting shortlisted for. So it does open a lot of doors, and I would encourage people to think about doing a degree. It is a passport. Doesn't guarantee a job, but it guarantees that you've got the facilities to apply for a job, and you should eventually get one. And it's very important to realize that if you plan to follow the route to achieve your ultimate dream of working with reptiles in an academic sense and working overseas, you make sacrifices along the way. No success comes without sacrifice.
That was brilliant advice. Thanks a lot, Mark. Mark, how do you see job opportunities with snakes and herpetology changing over the next 10 years?
We've got a lot more species that are becoming endangered, whether it's habitat destruction, overcollection, the pet, well, not the pet trade, yeah, but probably also things like sometimes the massive slaughters of sea turtles, the Asian turtle crisis, which is actually freshwater turtles being collected in large numbers, so disappearance of species, and even potentially global warming affecting native species because it's becoming too warm for them to survive. So we are going to need a lot of ecologists and herpetologists and all sorts of people to put their heads together. I mean, amphibians, for a start. Amphibians are our most threatened vertebrate group. They're affected because they live in both an aquatic and an air environment. They're suffering terribly from chytrid, which is a fungal disease that it hardens their skin so they can't actually respire through their skin, and they end up suffocating to death. And chytrid has been reported from every country on Earth where amphibians are found, except Papua New Guinea, which I think it'll be there, it's almost inevitable, and the Seychelles, where it might not be. So, you know, we need people who are going to help combat chytrid. You know, they have to clean out entire ponds and scrub them clean, then reintroduce the animals. I mean, we could lose a third to half of our amphibians in the next few years without intervention and without controls. And there's a snake fungal disease as well that causes their heads to swell up, and that's a nasty disease in North America, and it's spreading from there. And we need people, veterinarians and things like that, that are going to investigate all these things. Because the Earth is being hammered by Homo sapiens. We need Homo sapiens that are prepared to go out and try and redress this, and look at the causes and try and solve them. More captive breeding programs of endangered species, more surveys of what species are endangered, more studies of biodiversity in remote areas that might not have been affected by man yet, but have probably got chytrid. There's going to be a lot of need for herpetologists. Back in the 100 years ago, expeditions didn't have herpetologists. When the Archbold expeditions went out for the American Museum of Natural History, they went to New Guinea, both the Dutch side and what is now Papua New Guinea. And they did 7 expeditions in the 30s and the 50s, with the Second World War intervening in between. And they made huge collections of specimens. They had mammalogists, ornithologists, entomologists, ichthyologists, ethnologists. They didn't have herpetologists. Expeditions back then didn't. The reptiles and amphibians were a bycatch of the mammologist, or possibly even the expedition doctor, who hopefully didn't have much work to do, and they'd say, well, you go and collect the reptiles and amphibians. So all these specimens came back, and they didn't necessarily have good notes attached to them and where they've been collected, and they didn't understand the relevance of some of the material they collected, which only now we're realizing how important it is. So you know, it's only in the last few decades that expeditions are thought to include an herpetologist on their staff. So it's very it definitely is a late coming science discipline to expedition work. So I think there's a lot to be done. And you don't all, you know, you hear students say, well, they've described everything, it's all been done. No, it hasn't. No, there are so many tools now that can be applied to describing new species. You can have one widespread, very cryptic, well, it's one widespread species, or that's what it looks like, and they all look very similar. But in actual fact, there's 4 or 5 cryptic species in there, and the only way to tell them apart is to use molecular techniques. Well, that's, you know, fairly recent. And so one of them could be an island form that's extremely threatened. So now you need to protect it. So now you need 1 specimen or 2 specimens of that in a collection with a name and legislation drawn up to protect that name. So I think I could do with another lifetime after this one, if you don't mind.
So jobs in the next 10 years could be in summary, zookeeper, park ranger, academic.
Museum. Don't forget museum staff as well. Museum work. In academia, of course. Educationalists going around doing lectures around schools. There are quite a lot, and that's, you know, in this country, there's going to be other opportunities overseas. And of course, with a degree, you're qualified to apply for them. You know, there are certain jobs that if you've got the qualification, you'll get work almost anywhere in the world. And those jobs are nursing, medicine, and English teacher. So you get a job anywhere with those. As a biologist, also as a biologist with qualifications and some publications behind you. I'm going to come up with a tip to budding herpetologists in a minute. It makes you a saleable product. You could travel and you could work on a project for 3 or 4 months and move on and get that onto your CV. It's better than just sitting on the beach if you're going on a world tour. One thing I tell up and coming herpetologists is, I mean, if you look on Facebook, there's often interesting pictures of something unusual eating a reptile, or a reptile eating something unusual, or a frog, or a species that's identified as species A, which shouldn't be where it's been found. And these are on Facebook and everyone goes, wow, that's amazing. Oh, look at that video. Wow. And a week later, it's spilled to the bottom, disappeared, and that's it gone. It's fine putting it on Facebook. But if you observe something, and I've spoken to some of my younger friends who've done a lot of tropical expeditions to do photography, they go out to photograph reptiles. And I've said, they've told me about something unusual. Have you got photographs? Yes, I've got photographs. Did you record all the species involved? Yes, I did. Yes. Do you know what the spider was? Yeah, I do. I can get that identified. Publish it. Publish it as a short note in one of the journals. There are ways of doing this. There are journals that accommodate this. If you don't know how to write, and the first time you don't know how to write one of these notes for a journal, they do give notes for authors that explain how to do it. But if you're not confident, it's a good idea to communicate with somebody who's done it before and written notes and say, will you come in as my co-author and help me write this? And get it published, and it's publication on your CV. And if you get 3 or 4 of these, they're scientific publications. They might not be top flight journals, but they're getting published. You can still put it on Facebook, but Facebook doesn't help your career. Getting it published in a scientific paper, journal, does. And that's very, I mean, I'll give you an instance where I found when I found Facebook useful. I was in Papua New Guinea. I mean, I've been in Papua New Guinea now 10 expeditions there. In fact, I wrote the field guide. I'm working on the 2nd edition. And it was a grassland. Fire is a natural thing. Fire occurs. There was a fire burning across this grassland. And behind the fire, up in the air, there were about a dozen or 14 birds of prey. And I don't know what they were because I'm not an ornithologist. But they were diving down and they were taking animals that are obviously been overcome by the heat or the flames behind the fire, and they're eating them. The fire then, at an angle, hit a dirt track, which was what I'd been standing on. So the fire comes onto that at an acute angle. And out of the grass ran these skinks, which are lizards. And there were 2 species of skinks ran out onto the grass, onto the sand. And I thought, oh, I know what those are, but I'll catch them. I'll catch some anyway. And the birds altered their entire behavior. Instead of being behind the fire, because the fire was now driving lizards onto this path, this dirt road, the birds shifted to directly over the path. And they were coming in, swooping down and taking the skinks. In fact, I was about to catch one lizard when a bird of prey came in over my head and took it from in front of me. So I thought, this is amazing. So I got a camera and I shot off 4 frames. And I did them, there was only seconds between them. and there were 4 skinks on the dirt track, and there were birds of prey wheeling above. And in the 4 seconds that the 4 shots I took, the birds had come in different angles and taken all 4 lizards. They were gone. And from the photos afterwards, I was able to marry up which bird had come in and taken which skink. One, A takes 1, B takes 2, etc. And I got this sequence, and I wanted to publish it, but I couldn't because I didn't know what the birds of prey were. So I posted some of the pictures I'd taken of the birds of prey flying, sitting on the burnt trees and things like that on Facebook, because most of the people on Facebook that I interact with are naturalists. Within an hour, I got identifications, not just from one person, from about 3 people saying, yeah, that's definitely what it is, because that was their thing. And I was able to publish the paper. I knew what the skinks were. I now knew what the birds were. And it was an interesting paper about how these birds altered their behavior when the fire hit the dirt track. And, you know, that's something you'd have just stood there and maybe filmed and stuck on. No, I got a paper out of it.
That's brilliant advice. Absolutely fantastic. I hope you enjoyed that video and found it informative.